prioritize your health, because if you get sick, you can't do anything, right? Literally, you can't do anything. Even if you're sick for a week because you're down with something, that's a week that you're not being productive. That's what I tell people and that is really a systematic game. I would say everyone rely less on willpower.
Hey, Scott, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Most certainly. Well, I was kind of looking at your entrepreneurial journey. Obviously, you've been working at a very large organization across the globe and have built a lot of companies internally, building divisions and building, a brand new business ideas and things like that. So worked in that space as an entrepreneur, and now most recently you've started your own company, raised some capitals, and growing that pretty rapidly. So can you share with our audience a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, how you got to where you are today, and how you got started with this new venture you're on?
Sure. Yeah, I think I've got a sort of like the typical but atypical model, meaning that I was an engineer by trade and training, which seems like a lot of entrepreneurs start there. But I went through building or growing businesses inside of other companies. And so a little bit of a different model. There's some really good pros, some cons too, for doing it that way. Network and security engineer coming out of university, was setting up security infrastructure. And at the time, most of the companies, big companies, had network operating centers, but they didn't have a SOC because you didn't have security devices. So the very first firewalls and intrusion detection systems, we didn't really know what to do with the data. And so we started building the very first security operations centers, which were essentially a subset of the NOC where we sent the data and we had people residing to look at the data. From there, went on to help build what became, I think, the world's largest MSSP. It was a company called RipTech that became Symantec's MSSP, which is now over at Accenture. Got the opportunity to go to Asia. I got to live in Sydney for 4 years, which, as I like to joke, was the world's best assignment. Living in Sydney isn't terrible. So built SOCs in Sydney and all throughout Asia, and then went back and ran the global business out of DC. And the great part about that is you sort of got to be mini CEOs, right? So you got to be a general manager of Asia Pacific and Japan. You got to be a general manager of the overall business. So you sort of got the full understanding of running the business without necessarily, having to do it on your own the very first time. So there's some really good lessons learned. Large companies have good training programs for the most part. And some of the risk is taken away by the fact that you have the surrounding functions, whether or not that's legal, whether or not that's HR. From there, went to a company called FireEye Mandiant before the Mandiant acquisition, built their MSSP business before Soul Cyber. And it's just been a great journey. The ability to build businesses inside of other ones has been, I think, really useful, especially for me, because I was able to learn the business aspects, I think, in a broader extent than I would have otherwise. I think the downside is you tend to become an entrepreneur later, because if you get into a large company and you're having fun and you're building businesses, then starting your own, it's easy to sort of push that back. Where sometimes, as they say, take a young person in their early 20s that doesn't understand risk, and they'll just throw themselves into it and find a way to be successful.
Yeah, you're in the risk and security business already. So
that's right.
So obviously, like you said, the benefit of working at a very established company, you have a lot of the infrastructure and even the financial backing all within that. You're not trying to win their heart. They already kind of have their heart in that division or that business unit, right? Mm-hmm. So they just want somebody who's got the business acumen, the skill set, and the willingness to go and run it. Right. So that's a completely different model. But were you operating as a mini CEO? I know you said more as a general manager. And did you have like that like the organization structure to operate with the freedom and autonomy for you to run that organization? How was that structure? And how did you, what did you, get from that learning?
Yeah, we had almost all the pieces. We were like in Asia, I had sales, I had marketing. There's some shared resources in like legal maybe. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, you had full P&L responsibility with the underlying infrastructure and organizational structure to run it as such. And so consequently, what was interesting to me and why I stayed there so long was because of the fact that we owned operations and sales and go-to-market, right? And all the different pieces, which to me was what made it interesting. If I only got to own one, I would have probably left earlier to go either maybe do my own thing or go to another place. So the opportunity to build the operations, translate that into go-to-market, and then obviously run the go-to-market team, translate that into sales, which then impacts building out your operations. That whole function was interesting.
Yeah. Was there like a progression path that you were on that got you to that role? Whether that you started early just as a maybe hands-on managing some of the security, security things, and then moved into some sort of an operation function. How was that transition happening as your career advanced?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the standard
Hmm.
model is. I think I had a bit of a unique background because I had a technical background, and then I ended up in the sales organization, but sort of more as a large deal architect. So I'd be
Hmm.
structuring out larger deals, and then I was spending a lot of time with product management as well. And so I think what was happening was I was touching a lot of the parts of a business that you sort of need, obviously, to
Hmm.
run it. And so that made a logical progression for me to go and start the Asia Pacific business because of the fact that I touched so many of the pieces as I went through my career.
Hmm. So obviously, for people who may not be familiar with the MSP versus MSSP, can you define what that is and what is different?
Sure. Yeah, so MSP, managed service provider, and MSSP, managed security service provider. Think of it as the MSPs generally are focused on IT functions for an organization. You can even, when you think super large outsourcing, they're essentially like a glorified MSP, right? So if you
Hmm.
think of super large global outsourcing, where most people run into it obviously is sort of in the mid market. You've
Hmm.
got 500 employees and you don't want to hire an entire IT team. So you work with an MSP to deliver that. The MSSP moniker is like a specialty. So, for instance, what we do is we really help organizations drop in a security program. So the tools, the people, the processes, operational rigor, and then the detection and actually the response. So if you think about an organization that has whatever 5,000 employees, building out a 24/7 security program, even at 5,000 or 10,000 employees, is actually really difficult. So they can come to somebody like Soul Cyber and we can just drop that in and then we can work with their teams to be able to essentially run that at scale for them. And
Understood.
then also, if they have an MSP, we'll work with them or we partner with a lot of MSPs to handle the IT service needed.
So when did you realize it was time for you to go on your own and start Soul Cyber, and what was kind of the inspiration behind it?
So I'd been at FireEye pre-IPO.
Hmm.
So my very first job was with EDS, and I kept getting to smaller and smaller companies. So I went from super. Actually, technically, my first job was an intern at IBM.
Hmm.
So EDS is smaller than IBM. So I was going super, super large. And I kept getting to smaller and smaller companies
Hmm.
until I'd gotten to FireEye, which was pre-IPO, Mandian acquisition. And so I think my mindset as I was working was you can impact the company and the customers more when you're in a smaller company. And so I
Hmm.
think after the FireEye experience, I was sort of thinking, what do I want to do next, right? What do we want to do? And traditional MSSPs had been in the same model essentially for 20 years, basically since we built it way back in the day. And so when we're talking to potential customers or sort of thinking around the business, there's this opportunity around the fact that they wanted MSSPs to do more. So
Hmm.
they wanted less alerting and more response. They wanted less noise and they wanted more action. They wanted less. We'll call us don't yeah we'll call you don't call us, and they wanted more. We want to call you to ask about advice.
Hmm.
And so in that gap, there just was nobody doing it. So the traditional model was still essentially the model that was being run out there. And we just saw a need that customers were looking for more help across the entire sort of security programmatic aspect of running it for themselves. And that's why Soul Cyber seemed to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely finding the gap in the marketplace and trying to fill that void for sure.
That's right.
But you said something. A smaller organization has the ability to be more responsive and provide more agile deliverables, like be very agile in how they can serve and service their accounts. But I know one of the misconceptions about small businesses, at least in my own experience, is you have a lot of limitations in terms of the leadership structure, the key team members for like department heads and things like that, the VP, the director, and all those things. You lack some of those things, which makes a lot of the responsibility to be on the top leaders, sometimes the founder having to carry a lot of those weight. But you coming from having worked at much larger organization with very big organizational structure and foundation, how was that transition, and was it easier for you to kind of adapt and build a much smaller organization, or were you running into some roadblocks in that transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's definitely a mindset that has to happen with employees, with yourself, sorry, with the
Mm-hmm.
founder and with employees on startups. The part of the benefit I had was I was essentially building groups inside of other companies. So even when I was at FireEye, I was building a
Mm-hmm.
new team at FireEye. So you're sort of building many companies, but the but you do have to get your hands dirty. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
like there. I always, this is an overly stereotypical comment, but there are people that like to stay grotesquely inside their swim lane. And I joke,
Mm-hmm.
like, my mom is a very organized, very detailed, and wants a very specific set of rules about what's supposed to happen. And then there's people that like to handle a wide variety of certainty
Mm-hmm.
and learning. And because of that, they get to do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to startup world, I think you have to understand what you're hiring towards. Because if you get somebody who really likes a lot of structure, but you're an organization that has a lot of needs in a lot of different areas,
Mm-hmm.
that person's going to get very frustrated, and you're not going to be able to sort of reach the goals that you need as a company, or be able to, you know, promote them inside the company. On the other hand, if you have a very repeatable task and you get somebody who loves the startup world because they get to touch 7 different things at a day, and then you're like, no, I need you to do that same thing relatively consistently. So one of the things I tell, some of the advice I give is just think through what you're really trying to accomplish and where your needs are. So we have both. We run security analytics, which is a very consistent, repeatable function. So we're looking for people that don't get bored very easily. They like structure. They like to know how to go do what they're doing. And then we have a lot of other groups that were like, hey, you may be working on engineering functions today, and it could be on system problems tomorrow. And you need to be able to flex back and forth and sort of enjoy that. And so we try to be very clear about the type of person we're hiring for the type of role, because in a startup world, it really matters that you get the right people in the right place.
And do you have any system or process in place to kind of identify those people early on as you go
We
through
do.
that screening process?
Yeah, we do. So one of the things is being very clear internally. So when we're sort of building the company at the executive level, we are very clear that these types of roles are going to have people that are very flexible, and they're very open to working on other things. And then a very small set of roles have a very consistent, repeatable. So I think the first thing is just making sure you're clear on your job descriptions, and or the hiring managers understand that. Then the second thing is, during the hiring process, we call it out. So we'll say, we're a startup. Do you like working on lots of different projects at any given time? Do you like uncertainty? Do you like bringing order to chaos? If you're that type of person, then that's great. If it's a repeatable function, we're like, do you like having roles and responsibilities and working sort of on a consistent set of things on a regular basis, or do you like to dabble in lots of other areas? If they say they want to dabble in lots of other areas, they're probably not a great fit for an analyst who is literally, looking at security stuff all day, every day, right? So I think those two things are really important: is to have clarity in your head, translated to the JD, and then in the interview process.
Yeah, and then if you unfortunately put the person in the wrong seat, you're going to be the one to struggle after the fact, right? They're going to be unhappy, you're going to be unhappy, and you're not making the.
And by the way, I've never seen that problem be able to get resolved, because it's like intrinsic to the person. Like, either people enjoy working on lots of things, and we all know these people. Like, we know the person who's a tinkerer, right? And they've got 75 projects going, and then we know the person that's like maniacally focused on one thing. And so you just need to be clear, because it's really hard to fix that unless you can move them into a different role.
Certainly. So what were some of the significant challenges that you ran into, and how did you overcome as you started this Soul Cyber?
I mean, the biggest challenge I think we had is the MSSP market's been around for a long time. And so there's a preconceived notion of what the customer's getting. And then two, believe it or not, just the nomenclature in the MSSP space has gotten so just like confusing over the last, especially 10 years, that there's just a lot of noise out there. And so managed security services started out because customers didn't really know what to do with these new technologies, and they didn't know what to do with the data from the new technologies. But over time, that business morphed into essentially a SIEM. It's basically security incident and event manager in the cloud with an alerting service back to the customer. You say, okay, well, there's no managed in that. There's no managed inside of a SIEM alerting tool. Security, theoretically, service, not really. I mean, yeah, it's running 24/7, but when we think of service, and so what we had to sort of do was re-educate the market. one of the toughest things out there is sort of building a new niche or building a new brand. So probably the toughest thing we had was we'd go into a lot of meetings and we'd be like, no, we're not, don't think of the old model, think of the new model. And the easiest analogy I have was when like cloud first came out, when like Azure and AWS and all these services came out. People like me, I had thousands of Dell servers all over the world, right? I had ping, power, and pipe. I had colos. I had an entire infrastructure management team, right? So the first time I heard cloud, I was like, what am I going to do with all this stuff I've already invested in? I've already got it all. And then over time, what you come to realize is I don't need an infrastructure program. What I need is a person to manage an infrastructure service. So now I have people that manage AWS and Azure. I do not have personally thousands of Dell servers scattered around the world anymore. And I think that same thing's happening on security. But just like cloud got a lot of pushback at the very beginning, I think we got a lot of pushback the first year or so, because companies were not used to this idea of saying, hey, we'll give this to Soul Cyber and we'll manage Soul Cyber. And we'll do the more interesting and nuanced security, because doing this like consistent, repeatable security probably doesn't make sense. So that whole build the business, build the market, it's not trivial.
Yeah, I think that's a big distinction people need to understand when they're getting into a new business, right? Sometimes if you're going into an established market, there's already existing demand for your product or service, and you are just another provider, but calling it different brand name is completely different, right? Where you're just trying to distinguish yourself or kind of show your differentiation based on maybe your name, your price, your maybe some qualification criteria, whatever you might have. Whereas you're a completely different way of thinking the world problem and saying, hey, you've been doing it the wrong way. We have a better solution for it. That is a lot of education that you have to do, especially in the early days, where sometimes sales is a one-to-one sales and education model, where marketing probably need to do a better job of educating at scale. So how was that in terms?
Great point.
Yeah. How did you, obviously you've done a great job. You've been in business a little over 3 years now. You've had some really reputable customers. So how did you manage to do that education at scale to get them to understand how you are different?
I want to double click real quick on the point you just made, because I think it's such a brilliant point. And I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this. The way to think about it is, is Uber in the market and you're building Lyft, right? Or are Uber and Lyft in the market and you're building full self-driving taxis, right? At the end of the day, everyone's trying to get from point A to point B, right? But those are wildly different businesses. That if you're just building the next Uber, there's one Uber and you're just going to take some of their market share, versus building a completely different model that still solves the same problem, but in a completely different way. And so I think you need to be really clear as an entrepreneur which one of those you are, because it massively impacts how you go to market. In sort of your branding. And so to that piece, I wish we had a silver bullet on how to solve that. The only thing I can tell you is we just are very active out trying to get the awareness out there. I mean, podcasts is a great example, but we do as much education as humanly possible via social, via media, via press release, partnerships, podcast videos. I've got a podcast called Security Shorts with Scott. And all of that is just in the effort to sort of get customers a little bit more used to this idea that there is a different way of doing managed security services, a different way. We had a customer the other day that literally goes, man, it's hard to cut through the MSSP noise, but I love you guys' model. And it's the first time I've actually heard it. That's really the struggle, right? And so we are constantly looking for new routes to drive engagement and awareness, so that we can get this message out of there's a different way to solve your programmatic security problems.
Yeah, like you explained, like capturing market share from somebody else who's a bigger player versus creating an entire category of service, which is a lot different to do. And like you said, you have to be investing into creating awareness for the problem, then for your brand, and then ultimately that leads to customers. So can you share a little bit about how, you've mentioned a bunch of different things that you do in podcast, content creation, appearing on other people's, shows and things of that nature. How is that actually panning out to be business? Like, is there anything you are doing proactively to say, well, there's definitely an uplift in terms of our brand recognition or the inquiries that are coming through our website or anything like that? How are you measuring some of those efforts today?
Yeah. So the way we break it down to keep it super practical is there's inbound via awareness. So this is somebody goes to our website and says, oh, this looks interesting. And I think the key piece there, at least on our side, is we have a very focused, a very clearly defined way we go about doing marketing, which is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, we are one of the only security products, let alone services, that actually offers pricing on our website.
Mm-hmm.
You can literally go in there and you can put in what you have and how you're set up, and we will generate out indicative pricing that's relatively accurate. And so one of the things we did was we said, okay, let's try to be really transparent, very authentic, and sort of start with that as this belief and let that sort of permeate all through everything we do. So from that belief, then we obviously try to drive content creation and just general awareness, SEO, of course, all the basics of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's leading to net new impressions via socials and obviously the website. So from that converts into people wanting to talk to us.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people get the fact that the dark funnel is very different now. Like if you go buy a car, what do we all do? We go and do a ton of research sort of online, and we sort of land on our final one or two, and then we'll go talk to the dealership, after.
Mm-hmm.
That's very different than maybe 15 years ago. And so we call that inbound. We do outbound activities, which is email, phone calls, socials, to customers that most likely are familiar with the MSSP space,
Mm-hmm.
but are probably also looking for something that's more comprehensive in the capabilities. So we have a set of people that we reach out to there. And then we do all kinds of non-traditional. So whether or not that's partnerships with MSPs, we do partnerships with consulting organizations, we do webinars, we'll have events that we do. We're doing some whiskey tasting and tequila tasting. So then we have these sort of non-traditional fun things that we do on a consistent basis. Mm-hmm. And the combination of those three arms, generates the net new opportunities that we have.
Yeah. And then have you seen any one of the areas being more effective, or have you noticed, leads generated inbound seems to convert at a higher rate or close at a higher percentage or anything like that?
Yeah, no, they are wildly different. So outbound gets more net new at bats, right? We talk to more customers when our, business development team is reaching outbound.
Mm-hmm.
The conversion ratio on inbound, the net new number of meetings from inbound is a lot smaller, but the conversion ratio is a lot higher. So somebody reaches out to us from website or from some content, the conversion ratio of that is maybe 5 or 6 times as high as the outbound BDR engagement. And then the webinars and websites tend to be just a little bit better. The webinars and events tend to be a little bit better conversion ratio than the traditional BDR. So inbound has a much higher conversion ratio, but much fewer numbers of net new meetings. Outbound, in the variety of forms, has more meetings, but a smaller conversion ratio.
And hopefully as the brand awareness increases and as your reach increases, right, that inbound flow would grow considerably, and then that ultimately would help you kind of surpass whatever other channels that are probably driving the most sales.
I think it's both, because what we're also starting to see is conversion ratios on outbound starting to improve. So as we've been in market now for, we started a company 3 years ago, we've been in market for a little bit over 2 years. You're starting to see that sort of brand, and also just having heard the questions that customers are asking, and then slightly changing the product and service over that time and continue ideating. I think the combination, we're seeing a little bit more inbound, and then we're seeing conversion ratios starting to increase on the outbound.
Yeah. And obviously you said like 2 years. How long do you think it took you to kind of build that inbound flow from all the content creation?
What happened is that traditional sort of early adopter, mid adopter, late middle, and then late, I think we ran into that. It was funny because we could tell almost immediately whether or not a customer was going to buy. Like the first, call it 6-9 months that we were in market, we would get these folks that would land on our website, and they were like, where have you guys been all my life? I've worked with 3 MSSPs in the past. And a lot of times they maybe just had moved to a new company that had 400 or 500 employees, and they had to build a program. And they were just like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And they just loved it. And then you'd see the people that were like, well, it's very different. I haven't really thought about it that way. And obviously the conversion ratios on that. So we could tell pretty quickly whether or not people, when they were coming inbound, were interested. And the second piece then was the flow was very uneven. So we'd have some weeks where we'd get a lot of inbound, then we'd have some weeks that were relatively slow. We never really sort of figured out why that was. We were obviously, as you're new, you're building content all the time. And so one of the things that we think and that we could maybe make a causal relationship was the more funny or interesting the content was, the generally speaking, the better the engagement was, which
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes it seemed like we had a little bit more web traffic and inbound. So kind of hard to like say for certain. But if you can keep your content authentic, a little bit humorous and interesting, we definitely saw an uptick.
Yeah, entertainment and education, combining both of those in
Yeah.
your content is the
It's
key.
tough though, right? It's
It
really
is.
tough to do these two things. Some people have a gift for being able to do that,
Yeah.
but most of us are engineers by trade. I don't know if humor
Yeah.
is our strongest suit.
Exactly. And then you're also doing, security, right? Cybersecurity,
Yeah,
all of that, which is
yeah,
not often in the most exciting topic to
yes,
talk about either.
that's
But
right.
you said something interesting. You said you've made your pricing public, which is
Mhm.
oftentimes, especially in the enterprise software or any sort of services like this, right? Where you have a lot of variables and then say, oh, it all
Mhm.
depends, right? Like whenever you have that conversation,
Yeah.
how do you guys charge? So why did you decide to publish that, publish your pricing? And then how has that helped you in terms of, because sometimes the fear is, oh, my competitors are going to find out how much I charge and that they're going to go adjust their pricing. That also is a legitimate concern, but that also is
Yep.
kind of the excuse people use and why they don't want to publicize their price.
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. So one, we are doing things so wildly different than most of the competition that
Mm-hmm.
they would have to essentially re-engineer their business to do what we do. So probably a little less concern there. Two, and again, this is the whole transparency thing. There is a limit, so we can support very, very, very large customers,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a limit on the pricing because the difference between a 10,000 seat company and a 50,000 seat company is not linear. So
Mm-hmm.
there's like a number in there that you're like, okay, if you get above this number, you're going to have to talk to us because it's kind of hard to put something out that's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third piece was we allowed for some customization in the calculator, so
Mm-hmm.
you could sort of get some of the customizations. So there's certain things that we have to do that you can't customize out, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's certain things that we can customize. And so I think to the complexity question, we obviously sort of upload everything because we can't put every single like iteration,
Mm-hmm.
but we felt like we could get it sort of close enough that it was fair and on point or directionally correct is the term we use. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't in to the, it's our number one land. Well, not the homepage is technically the number one
Mm-hmm.
landed on page, but trust me, people go to the pricing page. Like of all the other stuff we put out there,
Mm-hmm.
we can see in the numbers. So people go there. Is it leading to conversions? I don't know. Is it in line with our ethos of being transparent? Yes, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think it eliminates the bad apples, right? Like the people that are just tire kickers, and then when they find out the price, they're just not going to make
Yeah,
a decision. So if
that's
they're
right.
going to be exploring pricing options ahead of time, and if they still decide to have a conversation with your sales team, they're more likely are expecting some number that is, that they've already kind of
It could go to that
exposed.
conversion ratio
Mm-hmm.
too,
Yeah,
right? Why
yeah.
are inbound leads converting at such a high rate? Well, it could be
Mm-hmm.
because they've already looked at the pricing. They sort of know we offer our pricing is very competitive. We know what's in the market. We're very competitive for what we do, and so they
Yeah.
may have been like, "Man, I get all of this for a price that's relatively similar. Why not talk to Soul Cyber?"
Yeah, and the interesting thing what you're describing is right, like we're seeing this trend happening. I mean, enterprise sales software, consulting. This is where we thought pricing wasn't going to be something we can make public, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, you've used the car dealership example. Back in the day, you had to go to the car dealership.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think they had always the MSRP published on the
Mm-hmm.
car, but you never knew what the selling price would be, what kind of discounts were available.
Mm-hmm.
Today, you're walking in with a lot of that insight already in your hand, and you're just having the salesperson kind of guide you through the decision making process, which I think is the future of sales, right? Where we're
Yes, sir.
seeing the trend is salespeople are really consultative in the sense of making them make a purchase decision, giving them guidance on which option, but not necessarily holding all your cards, right? And then not disclosing anything. You're kind of at the mercy of the salesperson to figure
Yeah,
out what
I
the
agree
products
with
are.
you. We're violent agreement on that. We think
Mm-hmm.
it's going to go more that way, and I think as consumers, we're sort of getting used to that model. And the
Mm-hmm.
car, we use the car analogy a lot because you're right. Like
Mm-hmm.
I shop that way now when I need a car, and so our view is we have fewer salespeople
Mm-hmm.
because the belief is you have a more educated buyer, and therefore the job of the salesperson is to help sort of walk that customer through the buying process and to actually, obviously overcome objection and deal with competition, all that jazz. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a different model, I think, than it was years ago, where you had a lot of salespeople,
Mm-hmm.
beating the bushes trying to wrangle the customer in. It's a much more consultative type sales motion, because I don't think customers need or want to be finger gun sales closed anymore.
Yeah. And I think the enterprise organizations have to make a big transition to that. I think enterprise organizations are still kind of holding all their cards. You have to go through hoops. And I've seen some interesting posts on LinkedIn where people are talking about some of those experiences.
Yes,
where they kind of
100%.
Yeah, where they're kind of comparing enterprise sales software experience to someone who were to go to a restaurant and making like a order. There's like 7 people come, but nobody actually served them any food. Everybody just coming and collecting information.
That's right. That's right.
It's a pretty poor experience for a customer if that's how you would buy at a restaurant. So obviously, as a founder, co-founder and running this company, you have a lot of long-term priorities and vision, but you also have a lot of short-term things to prioritize and tackle. How are you balancing those both, especially in an industry where you are? There's a lot of rapid changes and industry trends that are happening as well. How are you kind of keeping your long-term vision inside while adapting to the short-term?
We have a phrase we use internally, which is, let's not run ourselves into a corner. So we try really hard to build for future scale while also serving the needs of the near-term customer and obviously drivers of the business. The only thing I'd tell founders out there is unless you're just way smarter than I am, which probably most of them are, but is get people that are smart and then set the boundaries. Like I said, we try really hard and we're very open. Like my CTO may come back to me and say, "Hey Scott, like if we do this, you're going to run straight into a corner, and in a year or two, we're not going to be able to change anything. We're going to be locked down. We can't there's no flexibility." And you have to rely on some of your people to try to tell you that. So obviously, besides setting the rules, you got to be open to the feedback. Like if you set the rules and then somebody tells you that and you get mad at them and yell at them, then that's going to discourage that type of dialogue. So it doesn't mean we're perfect, but I think from day one, I had this. It was literally a phrase, which is one of the things we don't hire assholes. It doesn't. I mean, so far we've had really good success. So we actually say we don't hire assholes, and we don't run ourselves into corners as much as humanly possible. And so I think that's really something for founders to think about, because as you scale and as you grow, you want to be able to have optionality. And if you've driven yourself into a set of technology or process decisions that limit that, then there's going to be a price to pay in the future.
Understood. In that same line of thought, I mean, how are you encouraging innovation within the organization and encouraging people to think outside the box and coming up with new ideas?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 aspects to that. The first one is cultural. Are you an organization that is open to feedback and allows for your employees to have ideas, while also saying, hey, sometimes we don't accept them. That doesn't mean it may have just been because there's a different direction we want to go. So I think you have to have a culture that's sort of open and dynamic, and everyone sort of knows what that feels like. And they also have been in places where it's very top down and limiting. So I think that's a big piece. 2, you sort of set it into the company culture. So we have quarterly product management offsites, like where we have big long lists of things that we're always thinking about and what do we need to accomplish, and here's some interesting feedback from customers. And so I think 1, culturally matters. 2, I think there's a process that helps drive that innovation. Again, we're engineers, so are we the most innovative people in the world? Not sure. But at the same time, we hear a lot from customers, and we're constantly thinking of ways to try to solve problems. And so if you set a process around that, then that sort of forces that conversation to happen, which is needed a lot of times because everyone gets so busy, right? That innovation sort of falls because everyone's so caught up in what's happening at 1 o'clock and then what's happening at 2 o'clock and what's happening at 3 o'clock. So I think for us anyway, a consistent cadence around the tracking of what we're trying to do, plus getting everybody out of their day job and into a location where they can have dedicated time to think helps as well. So I'd encourage people to think culturally, but also put some good process around it in order to drive and make sure you're setting the time apart.
Yeah, a lot of times I think we're expecting innovation just come naturally, but that doesn't happen.
No.
You got to be intentional about it. So obviously you're a busy man, right? Being co-founder, CEO, trying to build this fast-growing startup, and pretty much, probably involved in the product, the future of the company, maybe overseeing sales and marketing a little bit, right? And maybe the overall kind of the company culture and being on podcasts like these. So there's a lot of pressures and a lot of priorities. in front of you. How are you able to kind of manage your time and
Mm.
focus on the most important, and then being able to say no to no to some things may not be very productive?
I mean, I tell everybody this. Like most of the successful people I know, they've sort of realized that health matters a lot. So I've
Mhm.
always been somebody that really cares about their health. I saw a lot. My dad was a minister, so we saw a lot of unhealthy people. When you're younger, that sort of leaves an imprint on you. So the first thing I tell people, and I'm pretty maniacal, I'm like, you got to prioritize your health, because if you get sick, you
Mhm.
can't do anything, right? Literally, you can't do anything. Even if you're sick for a week, because you're down with something, that's a week that you're not being productive. So that's what I tell people and that is really a systematic game. I would say
Mhm.
everyone rely less on willpower. I go to the gym in the morning, right? I lay my clothes out, I get up, I just sort of do it on autopilot robot mode, right? And you just knock
Mhm.
it out, and then you feel great, right? I don't keep crappy food in the house because I know I'll eat it if I do. So systematically, I don't rely on my willpower to not eat the
Mhm.
the the, the chocolate donut. I just don't keep the chocolate donut in the house. So what I tell everybody is prioritize your health, whatever that means for you, but prioritize your health. It will make a world of difference. And then the second thing is recognize what your employees are good at and let them do it. And so I think there's a misnomer that, like, I mean, we've been really busy the last 6 months. Most of it's really good because we've had a lot of really good customer interaction. Great. I love that. Like more customers wanting to talk to us. That's a good problem to have.
Mhm.
But if the founder's just like, I'm constantly swamped, like I'm just constantly swamped, then there's something that your people aren't doing for you to be able to solve some of that problem for you. And so yes, I'm swamped, but I'm swamped more because we have so many deals coming in. That's a problem. That's a good
Mhm.
problem, right? That's different than I've got so many things breaking and my people don't know how to solve them because they have to come back to me. So the second thing I'd say in order to sort of manage yourself and manage your energy is recognize what your people are good at, give them guidance, give them guardrails. Like I said, when you're talking about like hiring people, like set some guidance around that so they know how to operate, and then let them do it. And
Mhm.
if you do that, what you'll find is they'll actually solve a lot of problems for you that you think that you need to be involved in, and at the end of the day, you probably didn't need to be involved.
Yeah, some great advice there to kind of scale your time for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give the younger Scott?
Yeah, I'd probably say start the company sooner than
Mhm.
later. I would definitely give something I got lucky in, but I would definitely say do and maybe me be more active is like try to find roles that allow you to take a larger chunk of the business. If you
Mhm.
want to be an entrepreneur, you need to be able to understand sales, marketing, legal, finance, like revenue recognition outside of just engineering pieces. So I got lucky on that by being able to sort of slip into those types of roles. But I'd be probably more because I'm trying to find those maybe sooner,
Mhm.
for certain. And then three, I tell everybody to like broaden your circle. I intentionally moved out of Dallas when I was younger. I live here again, but I've been gone for years. When you broaden that circle, move, go to a new city, it forces you to meet different people that have different needs. Because if you're staying in the same place, you're generally speaking going to run into similar people that have the similar needs. So part of the reason a big part of my success has been the fact that I've moved so much, I've met so many interesting people, and I've learned so much from them that I've been
Mhm.
able to sort of like take that and go, man, I would never, I would, a lot of the mistakes I think we've avoided at Soul Cyber was because I knew somebody in Singapore when I lived there, or somebody in Sydney that are viewing the problem differently than if I'd stayed in Dallas. So I tell people like get out of your comfort zone, change your circles, learn from the people that you run into the new locations because it sort of forces you to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's some really good career advice too, because I think kind of what you're describing is how you as an entrepreneur, you're actually expanding your knowledge and making yourself put yourself in very challenging situation, taking on responsibilities. Like a lot of times, people just want their salary, go home, have the
Yep,
9 to 5, and they don't want to risk their career, or they don't want to risk their comfort.
that's right.
And but unless you actually show that you're trustworthy, you can be counted on, and you wanted to go beyond your comfort of just being an engineer, right? You're taking on
Yep.
responsibility, willing to travel and move to another continent and do things, which is ultimately will make you indispensable in the organization that you're working at, and then also prepare you for whatever future may hold.
It'll stretch you. But if you're, I mean, I know this sounds crazy, but it's kind of hard to fail because there's so many people that want you to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Contrary to sort of the opinion out there, like organizations want you to succeed. And so if you're trying hard and you're doing the right things and you're taking the right approach, resources will rally around you to sort of up level you to where you need to be.
Most certainly. Well, Scott, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your life lesson and wisdom with my audience.
You got it. Thank you for having me.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.